Continuing the player season review series today, we're talking about backup guards who played in more than 30 games for the Pacers, an important line of demarcation. So today's Kiefer Sykes, Jeremy Lamb, and Lance Stephenson, a fan favorite. We'll talk about all their seasons and where they can grow for the Pacers on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News, and today we are back on the player season recap grind, talking about backup guards for the Pacers. I had to split this out because they had a lot of backup guards that needed their season. Talked about McConnell, Rubio, Wanamaker, Buddy Hield, Jeremy Lamb, Lance Stephenson, Kiefer Sykes. So this group today is the group of backup guards that played more than 30 games for the Pacers. Dwayne Washington also in the mix. I moved into the wings group just to make the episodes easier. But today's the backup guards played more than 30 games. So we'll go Lance Stephenson, Jeremy Lamb, and Kiefer Sykes. And yes, Jeremy Lamb in there. Everybody who played for the Pacers this year gets a review. And I'll talk about with the guys who aren't on the team anymore, what I learned from them and what it could mean for their team building strategy going forward. We'll start with the fan favorite, Mr. Stevenson. Today, Lance Stephenson back with the Pacers for the first time since 2017-18 when he played in all 82 games and the Pacers pushed LeBron to the brink. Very fun and exciting. Obviously, the highlights of the season for him, at least, were the 20-point first quarter against Brooklyn, setting his career high in assists against the Jazz at home 2 nights later. And for me, it was just unbelievable to see the whole season going on. Lance Stephenson would check in at home, and the crowd would go nuts. No matter who the opponent was, for the whole season this happened. For all of April, March, February, after he was signed, it happened. And it was fascinating to see that phenomenon continue, even as his efficiency went away, even as his effectiveness kind of dropped a little bit. But he was still getting those backup point guard minutes and making the crowd go crazy in home games. Lance has that effect on fans. I know that. It was one of those things that I liked watching down the stretch of the season as many of the basketball parts of the season went away. And Lance, for all the stuff that he did not do well in the past, or all the reasons he struggled with the past with the Pacers, he had some very, very strong redeemable qualities this year that he hadn't had in years past. And chief among them, when you talk about the good things that happened for Lance this season, was the passing. Right? Nearly 4 assists per game in 18.6 minutes. That's a really, really good mark. And if you go to his per minute numbers, per 36 minutes, 7.5 assists per 36 with the Pacers this year. That is a career best mark for Lance. Like, this is the best he has ever helped guys finish plays with his passing. And some of that was Rick Carlisle realized, and sometimes the Pacers franchise has recognized this in general, but when Lance is less effective is when he's off ball more often. He needs the ball to be effective. And it just so happened the backup point guards he was competing with were not particularly strong or were not good passers. So they needed him to be that bench setup man. And he really took it in stride. And that's something he's always been a decent passer. Like his rookie year, he passed pretty well. I thought in the year he was nearly an all-star, he passed pretty well. His first year in Charlotte, he passed pretty well. But this was the best he's put it all together of helping his teammates get open, being that guy who can get paint touches and help guys get open. The Pacers did not have any of that with the second unit, and Lance could do it. So his passing definitely was the best it's ever been, and it was really helpful for the Pacers this year. Something else I thought was helpful for the Pacers is he could play more than one position. A lot of their bench guards were kind of locked into either an off-ball role or an on-ball role. He could play 1, 2, or 3, Lance could, which was really helpful because like Kiefer Sykes, you have to play at the 1, and TJ McConnell, you have to play at the 1, and Buddy Hield is clearly a wing, and Dwayne Washington's clearly a wing. Lance, they could slide to all of them, which really helped with lineup versatility with, again, this season having so many guys in and out. They really needed that. And Lance's defense, I thought, is on-ball defense. Let me be very clear. I thought was pretty good this year for a team that struggled mightily with that. I wouldn't say it was like above average or anything, but it was fine. It was serviceable for a team that lacked so many defenders. I thought he was good on-ball defense. So Lance did a lot of stuff that made him effective with the Pacers second unit this year in a way that he hasn't in years past. Like, he was sort of an inefficient chucker who just gave them energy in past seasons, and that's not like a useless player, but it's not someone you want to invest in. Like, this was a quality backup point guard level player this year, and that is not what he's been in the past. So impressive stuff from Lance on the good side of what he was able to do. Their offensive rating was 2 points per 100 possessions better with him in the game. Now, when you go to the bad side of Lance this season, the biggest thing for me was the off-ball defense, and I'll talk about that in the growth for him because look, his on-ball D is good. Very nosy, very pesty, stocky for a guard, like bigger for the position he plays, especially when he's playing the one. Like being 6'6", 230 and playing the one is a big advantage. Off-ball, he just falls asleep and doesn't rotate very effectively. And obviously, it was tough to fit him in between going from Atlanta to Indiana, so he's learning a new system, and then they trade half their team, right? Like a lot changed for him. But the Pacers' defense was 7 points worse per 100 possessions with Lance on than off in the games that he played, and 122 defensive rating with Lance on the floor. His team defense was atrocious. One of the bigger flaws with their defense all season when he was in the game. That's something he's absolutely got to be better at going forward, and one of the worst things about his season. Another part of him having the ball more as a point guard and passing more often was his turnovers went way up, 1.7 per game, and again, 18.5 minutes. Really high per 36 turnovers. Again, 3.3. That's the highest it's been for him since he was a rookie, right? His turnover rate went way up. 16.5 turnover percentage is super high. That's above his career rate, right? So Lance definitely in his role had to pass more, and he did well with it, but he also turned it over more, handling the ball so much. And some of them were very uninspiring turnovers. And his efficiency was interesting this year because 54% isn't bad necessarily. He finished the season at 53.6% if you count the Hawks. That's his best mark since 2015-16 when he played for the Clippers and Grizzlies that season, which says a lot that a below average mark is his best in years. His only above average season in efficiency was again that year that he was nearly an all-star in 2013-14. And that's not like bad, I would say, given his shot selection. But I think that the fact that he still doesn't have a three ball means he's got to be hyper efficient inside the arc to get to that level. And I don't know if that's necessarily sustainable. Like his 51.6% 2-point percentage this year with the Pacers, that is, would have been his highest since, again, 2013-14 when he was an all-star level, almost all-star. I keep saying that, and maybe I'm remembering that year wrong, but I remember Lowry was the first big snub in the East in 2014, and then Lance was the second one. And they weren't snubs, I don't think. I don't think either of them should have been all-stars, but they were both right there. Top 15 player in the conference. I'll just say all-star level for the ease of speaking. So he's got to clean up all that stuff. Turnovers and inefficiencies. I think just a little bit better shot selection for Lance would go a long way because then he's not wasting so many possessions by giving it to the other team via a miss or via a turnover. One stat that tells it all. We do that for everybody here as we review seasons on Locked On Pacers. 31.2% assist percentage for Lance Stephenson with the Pacers this year. That's a big number. That is a huge number. So what that is the percentage of made baskets that are assisted. What percentage did he assist when he was on the floor? That generally is reserved for guys who have the ball all the time and are their team's main creator. And Lance, by virtue of his passing being better and the guys he was playing with not being good passers, got a 31.2% assist percentage with the Pacers this year. Over the course of the full NBA season, had that number held up, that would have been 17th in the entire NBA, right behind Russell Westbrook, right ahead of LeBron, right ahead of Steph Curry, right ahead of Cade Cunningham, right next to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Giannis was at 31.7. Kyle Lowry's at 32. Like he really was the source of passing for that Pacers second unit. And he was very good at it to the extent that it made the team better on offense. So good for him there. An area for growth, decision-making, like I said, with his shot selection and passing in general, a little too aggressive with some of that. And his off-ball defense, absolutely atrocious. Maybe the best off-ball defender on the team when the season came to an end. We'll talk about a worse off-ball defender who they traded in the next segment. Two big areas for growth for him, especially to me. You kind of know what you're getting with Lance on defense, I would say, at this stage of his career. But if he could just clean up a little bit on offense and make himself an even on-off guy, I think that would be really helpful. So the end of these season recaps, you look ahead to the future. What does this all mean for Lance? Because his season certainly is strange when projecting his future, right? After 2018-19, out of the league, plays in China, goes to the G League to get back to the NBA, and requires the COVID hardships to get that call up. Now, he proved on that 10-day COVID hardship that he belonged with the Pacers, right? Him getting his spot on the team was initially due to that, but he earned the rest of the season spot on the team. They ended up cutting Keelan Martin to keep him, which was 100% the right choice in retrospect. But now what, right? Those ways into the league are gone for some guys. And for Lance, I'll do a full pot on his free agency just like I did with O'Shea earlier this week, and we'll continue to do for a bunch of guys going forward. So the high-level view of it is, if he is going to be back, the thing is, like, it might depend on a lot of other guards in front of him. Halliburton's for sure going to be back. But there's also guys who will either be back or handle the ball at guards that are, Chris Duarte, Buddy Hield, TJ McConnell, Malcolm Brogdon, Dwayne Washington. This is the Pacers' most crowded position. entering next season. And it's not even really close that like of what the other guys at that position could be. Who knows what's going to happen with like Nate Hinton and Gabe York in their restricted free agencies, right? There are a lot of names for guards for the Pacers this summer. And so you bring in Lance, and here's how I feel about this. I don't think he would play if all those guys are healthy, especially if they end up with another guard via the draft. You know, 2 top 31 picks. One of those guys, if it's a guard, will probably be ahead of Lance on a depth chart. At least I would think so. So bringing back Lance next year would not necessarily be about him playing or being in the rotation, right? When they signed him this past season, they were desperate for backup point guard play. They had only cut Wanamaker a few days before his first contract was signed. Brogdon was in protocols and often injured. LeVert, same deal. Jeremy Lamb was really struggling. Like they needed guard depth anywhere, and it made sense. Now they won't need that. McConnell was out for a long time when they signed Lance. They won't need that next year. So for Lance, if he's, I think the negotiation might be like, hey, we can't do that much for you in terms of you playing. Like him being on the team seems great for fan engagement and the roar of the crowd kind of stuff as a 15th guy. Jersey sales presumably awesome. But there's not like a good basketball reason to have him back unless they move on from other guards, which I think is possible. If they draft another guard, maybe they want to get rotation minutes for him, or maybe they want to free up room for Dwayne Washington, so they move on from one of Hield or Brogdon. Maybe they want to move on from Hield or Brogdon because they're vets, same with McConnell. It's not impossible to me that they move some guards, and then they need point guard depth and Lance is back. But I think a lot of his free agency will come down to what other stuff the Pacers do at the guard position. That said, again, as a 15th man fan favorite, the Udonis Haslem roster spot, it's not a terrible idea. to get people interested in a team through a rebuild is not a terrible idea. So his free agency is interesting because there's that extra factor of being such a massive fan favorite. And again, he actually played pretty well as a reserve point guard this season. I don't know what's going to happen for him. I think it'll ultimately depend on what happens elsewhere. But again, I'll probably do his next just because I know people are really interested in it. His free agency has so many complicating factors from a team building and excitement perspective. Let's go to the next guy, a guy that was traded in February to the Kings, Jeremy Lamb. Again, I'm going to do everybody, and then we'll do Kiefer Sykes at the end. On these player season recaps, all 30 guys who had a contract with the Pacers this season will be talked about. Before we talk about Jeremy Lamb, I want to talk about the good people over at Built Bar. Summer is coming. Can you believe it? It's almost May, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go, and Built Bar are the perfect snack to take with you on your family vacations. Throw them in your bags, in your kids' backpacks. Make sure that everyone has a bar so they're fueled for summer adventures. The best part about Built Bar is they're healthy and delicious. No more sacrificing food for health. With Built Bar, you can have both their protein bars that are 100% covered in chocolate. Super easy to manage that deliciousness with health. Go to Built.com and order them now to try them. They've got puff flavors that are 100% covered in chocolate. They have like a marshmallow infusion. They've got my favorite, the peanut butter brownie on there. They've got cookie dough on there. If that's not enough, you can get a mixed box with 12 different flavors with some puffs mixed in. Only 140 calories in most of them. You can see all the macros right on there. 130 calories in quite a few of them as well. 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. Compare them to a candy bar, which they taste better than, and it has double all those things. You got to try Built Bar. Go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. That promo code, again, is LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Now. Hear about the NBA playoffs from our local experts on every single game. Pelicans, Suns, Raptors, Sixers, Jazz, Mavs, a big slate of first-round playoff games tonight, and you can get it all from Locked On Now for the local angle on all those games. Jeremy Lamb season recap. The fifth guy we're doing for these season recaps is the first guy who did not finish the season with the team. And Jeremy Lamb is such an interesting player to evaluate. For me, his first season with the Pacers, I was much higher on his effectiveness than most. They needed a shot creation with the starters, with Oladipo hurt. He was good with the second unit. Some people thought he was a ball stopper, but he was shooting like 45%. Didn't really matter. He was solid that year. Then he got hurt, and ever since then, Jeremy Lamb has been a woefully ineffective player for the Pacers. And that is largely because his defense was never particularly good, and it was about the same level when he came back from the injury. But he lost a lot on offense when that happened. And that makes evaluating this season and all the seasons he played with the Pacers post that devastating injury he had in Toronto. And the injury could have done a ton for him. Really tough. So there were some good things he did. And first of all, he played if he played one more game for the Pacers, he would have played in 40 games for the Pacers this year. So he did have some games he missed with injury, but in regards to the Pacers ecosystem and how the season went, pretty healthy for the First half of the season, he missed a chunk at the beginning of the year and then right before he was traded. But in general, a healthier year for him. He played more games this year total, 56 if you count his Kings games, than he did in either of his first two seasons with the Pacers, right? Which is crazy to think about how his time with this team went. So relatively healthy year. He's a low turnover guy. I think that's one of the things that made him a reliable play finisher when he was pre-knee injury a couple years ago. Never turns it over. 8% turnover rate for his career, 8.4% this year with the Pacers. 6.6% that year that I thought he was actually really effective with when he was with the starters more often. When Vic was down, right? Like that is one redeeming quality of his. He never turns it over. He does not make boneheaded passing decisions. His handle's really tight still, even after surgeries. Like that is something he's pretty good at. And some of that's because he doesn't pass guys open that often, but that is something he is good at, is keeping the ball in his hands. And he grew in his 3-point attempt rate. I want to include that because that's like the next evolution to me for him is, if he can't really be a movement end of clock guy anymore because of all his injuries and his elbow jumper is evaporated. That used to be his thing. Like I used to think he would never miss an elbow jumper ever, right? The first season with the Pacers, 10 to 16 feet, 54.3%. Second season with the Pacers, pre-injury, 48.8%. And then boom, 41% this past season. That's a big drop off over 3 years, going down 14% over the life of his contract with the Pacers from that mid elbow spot that he was so money. The fact that his 3-point attempt rate went up means that's where his next offensive evolution is. If he can't be that mid-range guy who can bail you out at the end of the clock or get you a bucket when you need one, he's got to be a 3-point threat. And he got a little bit better at it this year. His 3-point attempt rate got over 50%, over half his shots were from deep. He found a way, with the Pacers it was, for the season it was not. So he found a way to get open from deep. His assisted percentage of those shots went up a little bit, 82%. With the Pacers, it was 90% of his threes were assisted, right? He found ways to be a little more effective as a shooter or an off-ball guy. And that was big for his development with the Pacers. But in general, just really not a good season for Jeremy Lamb. And a lot of that was because that inside scoring where he could take guys off the bounce and hit tough shots just was gone, right? He shot 41% on two-pointers with the Pacers this season, 37% from the field in general. He didn't take a ton of shots. It was down to 6 a game by the end of his stint under Carlisle. Only was playing about 15 minutes a game, but his efficiency going away was absolutely killer for the way he plays. And I mean, what was bad about his season beyond that? His defense is just awful. He at least could kind of, when he was engaged, guard guys before his injury, but in the 2 season sense, woefully ineffective both on and off the ball as a defender. It was really rough to watch him play defense this year. A big part of why their defense took a massive step back defensively. So that he's just got to get better at that going forward. Even if he's not with the Pacers, he's got to get better at that. And I'll do the area for growth for him just as a natural follow up to that. Like if Jeremy Lamb, he just got $10 million a year coming out of Charlotte because he could be an offensive microwave guy who could kind of start sometimes, but be an effective bench player and had just slightly below average 3-point shot. And like I said, decent defender on ball when engaged. And now he's not the microwave scorer, and he hasn't been a decent defender on the ball the last couple of years. What kind of role is this guy going to have in the NBA? Like he's got to meaningfully grow one of the key areas that taller two guards or wings have to have a role on a team next year. I don't think he'll be benched anywhere necessarily. He could be a quality like 9th or 10th man, but like in Sacramento, he wasn't playing that much to the point that he wasn't playing. He had some injuries there, but the Dante DiVincenzo's camp was like mad that he wasn't getting as many minutes. Like Justin Holiday was starting over DiVincenzo, but Jeremy Lamb was playing a lot. Like he's got to find a niche to be on the floor, and I think the defense is the easiest one for him to get a little better at because I don't, maybe he can develop the 3-ball this late in his career. He's got good form, and again, he was better at that this year with the Pacers, at least getting them up. But if he can improve his D to just like a below average level instead of like bottom 15 dudes in the league level, that would at least allow him to be in an NBA rotation next year, I think, just because he can still do a little bit off the bounce and he's a low turnover guy. I think that will allow him to be in a rotation next year, but it's going to be interesting to see how it sort of shakes out for him because he really fell off after that injury, which is unfortunate for him. And I hope he can get back. I hate that guys, lose their careers over this stuff, but as a free agent, he's got to get better at the defense going into next season. And the one stat that tells it all for me for Jeremy Lamb's time with the Pacers this season, he shot 37.3%. I already said it, but it kind of tells the story of his season because this guy's supposed to be an offensive specialist. Like that was a big part of the allure of the Pacers bringing him in. They had, remember the year they signed Jeremy Lamb, was right after the Tyreek Evans failed experiment. And so they knew they weren't going to bring Tyreek back. The league suspended him. There was a lot there, but Vic was still hurt, right? They needed a guy who could actually be good in that role. And Jeremy Lamb was that at first until the injury, right? Again, he shot pretty well his first year with the Pacers, 45% from the field, hit over half his 2-pointers. That was a useful player. And so to go down to 37.3% shooting with the Pacers this year and 41% on twos, like what was he? He had provided positive value basically nowhere. Their offensive rating with him on the floor was barely better than with him off, and it was still a below average mark. He just gave them almost no value this season because that number deteriorated so much. So he's got to grow something in his game, I think, to go back to being a rotation level guy who's pulling in, 8 figures. I can't count. I don't have to usually use figures to talk about $1 million numbers. 8-figure deal, again, I think will require him to drastically improve something next season. And so I can't talk about his future with the team because he's not on the Pacers. He is, in fact, a free agent this summer. So I guess if the Pacers want to bring him back, they could. I don't know why they would. Like I talked about with Lance, already a logjam at guard. He's outside of their age range. That makes any sense to me. And there's just no real point to them signing him unless he's taking like a non-guaranteed minimum deal. But I did learn something from Jeremy Lamb. And it's the high level thing I learned from Jeremy Lamb. And I'll do this with, again, every Pacers player who finished the season, not with the team, but did play for them. I learned that about the value of a guy who's not good on defense or 3-point shooting in the NBA as it is today. You're not useless. I'm not trying to box these guys in as just like, if you can't do either of those things, you're not good. You can be a 2-point specialist and a bad defender and still be an okay player. Look at TJ McConnell, right? He can pass the lights out, and he's a much, much better defender than Jeremy Lamb. But his size makes him, limited on defense at times too. He's still effective because he has something he's good at, right? Which is getting in the lane and setting up his teammates. And he got a little bit better at the 3. But there are a million ways you can do that. Really, every center basically who's not a good defender but can finish around the rim really well, right? Like that is another example. There are ways to be an effective NBA player with no 3 or no D. But as a guard, it's a lot harder, especially in Lamb's case because he couldn't get in the paint as much anymore. He lost that elbow jumper that made him so effective. So the value of that player, the 2-point specialist who's not a good defender, is pretty damn low unless they have another really strong redeeming quality. And I guess that's kind of obvious in general as the efficiency era ramps up and as defense becomes more obvious. But in this case where it went from a guy who could be the 2-point guy to not being the 2-point guy, you really saw how his value went completely away. And so for those kind of players, they either have to be really good at the 2-pointer, which again, he was that first year in Indiana, or they have to find another way to be effective, whether that's with passing or with rebounding or with just general some connectivity stuff. And Lamb did not have any of those as his time with the Pacers went away. He was ultimately traded to Sacramento, was basically a throw-in because like the Pacers' salaries were matched up. When it was just Sabonis and Holiday for Halliburton and Hield, like those salaries were good. And they were like, you know what, let's add Tristan Thompson and Jeremy Lamb to the trade, even though their salaries are about the same. Like they didn't have to do that. He was just kind of a throw-in in that deal. And Thompson barely played for the Pacers. So that's a learning experience for me. Those kind of players can have value. They just have to add another skill or really improve at the 3 or the D part. And that's where I think Jeremy Lamb will need to take a step forward in one of those areas. For me, it's the defense for him. Let's talk about one more backup guard who played over 30 games for the Pacers this year, and that is Keifer Sykes, who got up to 32 in his rookie season in the NBA. Before we talk about Kiefer Sykes' season with the Pacers, though, I want to talk about the good people over at BetOnline.net, your number one source for all of your sports betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NBA playoffs and the start of Major League Baseball season, all at BetOnline.net. They're your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. For example, the Friday NBA slate, Grizzlies, Timberwolves, the only game on Friday. I love this point in the playoffs where there's only one game to get hype about. Grizzlies favored by 1 in a closeout situation. It's going to be very, very interesting. That series is crazy. Every game is just all over the place. If you are interested in that line, betonline.net's the way to go. Head over to that website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On NBA or Locked On NFL, because of the draft, is the way to go. We have other sports here on the network, and Locked On NBA, obviously, you can hear about the latest and greatest news about the league, including those playoff games from our Friday Locked On NBA hosts Adam Mares and Wes Goldberg, who've been killing it on their respective beats this year. Kiefer Sykes had his first season go with the Pacers and in the NBA. Fantastically cool story for a guy to fight back into the league at his age, to fight into the league at all at his age, really. Through camp, was good with the Mad Ants, was good in Summer League. Just a cool story. The shot he made for Boeheim's Army in the basketball tournament this summer, right? Like his whole story was cool. And Kiefer Sykes had a really interesting season to me because remember, I've never thought of it this way, but I'll describe it this way now. They signed him to a non-guaranteed contract on December 28th. And the day contracts become guaranteed if you don't get waived by that day is January 7th. So they effectively signed him to a 10-day contract, right? Like before you're allowed to, air quotes, sign guys to an actual 10-day contract. Like had they cut him on the 7th, he would have been on the team for 10 days. So he had basically a tryout. And in that span was his best stretch of the season, right? Huge game against the Cavs with 10 points. Huge game against the Knicks with 22 and 6 assists. He shot 50%. Very next night against Brooklyn, 6 of 10, 18 points, 5 assists. He was wonderful. He survives the cut date. And then they beat Utah with him as a starter the first day after his contract guarantees. Right, that stretch from when he signed his contract to right when his deal guaranteed, Kiefer Sykes was legitimately a useful backup point guard, and that's what they needed him to be. Remember how Brad Wanamaker gave the Pacers nothing? We'll talk about him on a future podcast reviewing seasons for the Pacers. So Kiefer Sykes giving them those kind of numbers and pretty low turnovers, 0 in his first game, 1 in his second game, 1 in his fourth game, 1 in his fifth game, right? He gave them what they needed. And then he kind of fell off. And so we'll talk about his season in its totality, but he earned that deal. His story was really cool. And they needed a backup point guard very badly. Lance ultimately ended up taking Kiefer's role. But when the Pacers needed him in that time, when they thought they could still salvage their season, he was pretty solid for them. So steady hand was, I think, the biggest thing that Kiefer provided this season. Like, not a high turnover guy, still made good passes, made good decisions in general. That was his offensive value to me. You know, like especially after seeing Wanamaker and Lance be turnover machines this season, Kiefer Sykes being a steady hand certainly had value for the second unit. And then his defense was, really impressive. Like, it's hard to be a good defender at his height. But if you'll recall at the end of the season, there were a few games, one against the Hawks, where he was really good on Trae Young. And that changed the game for the Pacers in the second half of that game. In that game, he had 16 points and 4 assists. They played Denver a few nights later. He's in the rotation again, does a good job against their second unit. They played Toronto before that. He did a good job on defense in that game as well, right? Like that stretch near the end of the season, his defense was really on display. And so, yes, like with McConnell, I mentioned earlier, even though he's not featured on today's show, at that height, it's really hard to be a positive defender. Like Kyle Lowry and Chris Paul. I'm sure I'm missing someone, but that's like it. Like that's the list of 6 foot and under guys who are capable defenders in the NBA right now. Sykes was pretty good though. At that height, I'd say he was like a league average defender, which is pretty tough to do as a 6-footer, especially on the ball. But he's very attentive off the ball. I thought defensively was his better end of the floor this season for the Pacers. So those are where he was good. Where he wasn't so good. Look, I mentioned that first stretch he had with the team, scoring wonderfully, 22-point game, an 18-point game, right? A consecutive stretch of 40 points and 11 assists in 2 games for a guy you just signed on back-to-back nights. Super impressive. And then he just forgot how to put the ball in the basket. He could not shoot well at all. He shot over 40 after January 12th, right? He plays the next game and is in the rotation as the backup, 2 for 6. And there's a few games without Lance on the team because they were doing the 10-day dance after that. Kiefer Sykes, after that game where he goes 1 for 1 on January 12th, the next time he shot over 40% in a game was March 15th. He went 2 for 2. And then the next time after that was not until the end of March into April, right? So he just lost his shot after he got through that trial period. And he was still that steady hand defensive guy, but his shot was gone. And that was really a part of what made him a valuable backup one, right, when he started with the team is he was putting the ball in the basket and cannon threes. He hit 4 threes in that game against the Knicks in New York where he had 22. He looked like he was going to be that guy. And in the G League, right, he was a little more of that guy. He was a dominant force passing the ball in the G League. Like that's what his big allure was with the Madden. He was like 7 or 8 assists per game guy. I'm pulling up those stats now. I should have done this earlier. But in the G League, yeah, that was right. In the G League, he was a much better and more, valuable scorer statistically. So to see those numbers not translate, at least as well as I thought they might, had to be pretty disheartening for him and the Pacers that they didn't end as well. From 3 with the Mad Ants, 35%, 8 assists per game, right? Big numbers. So to see his shot completely disappear, his impact was almost gone. He was basically just a defensive specialist as their backup one at that point. So what stat tells it all for Kiefer Sykes' season? I kind of just said it. 7. The number 7 is the stat that tells it all for his season. What is the number 7? That is the number of times Kiefer Sykes shot above 40% from the field this season. And 2 of those games, he played under 10 minutes and took a total of 3 shots. So really 5 games he was seriously in the rotation and shot better than 40%. And 2 of those games were when he was on his early 10-day deal, and the other 3 came in March, with 2 coming right at the end of March. So he was still, he was still a useful backup. One, I don't want to totally destroy the season he had, but his shot was just gone. Like 40% isn't even it's not even a Mendoza line. It's almost below. I guess that's the Mendoza line. And he was way below it. He finished the season 36.3% from the field, only 42% on 2-pointers, 30% on threes. Had he been a better 3-point guy or just not been as poor around the rim, for example, he could have been a little more effective, but did not have a lot from basically anywhere outside of 3 feet this season. So he's got to be a better finisher of plays if he wants to get serious minutes going forward. So his area for growth for me, obviously, putting the ball in the basket. And another one, he can't grow. So I think something that will help him is he gets a little faster with the ball. Kiefer Sykes, good, again, didn't turn it over that much. Quality decision maker, steady hand at the backup one, but wasn't the fastest dude with the ball for the Pacers' second unit in the way that McConnell and Lance and Halliburton even were. They could really run with those guys, and they could not run with him in the game as much, which I think hurt them a tiny bit. And so if he could get a little faster with the ball or just be more of a transition-focused kind of guy, I think that will help his NBA prospectus going forward. So this is an interesting one. I didn't really know how to include him in this because he didn't technically finish the season on the Pacers, but he got waived with like 2 days to go so they could promote Terry Taylor and Dwayne Washington. Do I count him as a free agent who finished the season with the team or not? I'm going with yes, although it's a little different because they don't have his non-bird rights this summer because they let him go. They could get his early bird rights if they bring him back, but they don't have his non-bird rights as of now. So Kiefer Sykes, look, the same thing that was said with Lance and Jeremy Lamb applies to Kiefer Sykes in this free agency period. The Pacers have a ton of guards coming back already. So they don't need anyone to fill a role there. Maybe they decide they need a vet one, but you'd think that they would rather bring back Lance than Kiefer Sykes in that situation. So I don't know that there's a ton of obvious logical reasons for the Pacers to bring him back unless they move other guards. And he'll get a segment on a free agency preview, I think. So unfortunately, I don't think there's a ton of good reasons for the Pacers to try to bring him back, again, unless a bunch of moves are made. But 2 things are in Sykes' favor to have some sort of roster spot in the NBA next year. One, he is still eligible for a 2-way deal, which I think could be valuable for teams that like this year we saw a lot of teams use 2-ways more for vets than in years past, and COVID was a big part of that. But to have a steady-handed point guard on a 2-way who can come in a pinch anytime, especially for competing teams, that has some value. So the fact that he's 2-way eligible could even be valuable for the Pacers if they want him on a 2-way to be that depth one in case of emergency. That would make a lot of sense to me because, the Mad Ants, he's also eligible there if he wanted to just flat out sign with them again. He fit in well in that system, did well for Fort Wayne, and showed in the G League that he was a good player in the G League last year. And I know that doesn't mean anything a lot of the time, but that the fact that he made it to the NBA and had good games suggests that it means something. So perhaps he could be another, maybe not quite the O'Shea Brissett story, but signs with the Mad Ants and gets like a 10-day next year, or as a 2-way guy. Because I don't think he'll get a roster spot with the Pacers again, unless they make a ton of moves that excise guards to other teams this summer. I don't think there's going to be a room for Kiefer Sykes on the Pacers roster. They only have 3 or 4 roster spots depending on how the draft goes entering the season, right? So they're already not pinching pennies. They have no money concerns. They're already very cognizant. They have to be very cognizant of how they use those spots. And so to sign a guard seems very unlikely to a raw roster spot. So I don't think Kiefer Sykes would get a standard deal, but I think there is a chance he could get a 2-way deal in theory, or just go back to Fort Wayne and grow with that system and try to earn his way back to the NBA, kind of like what Lance Stephenson did this past season, going through the Grand Rapids Gold to eventually the Hawks and then to the Pacers. So that's the backup guards who played more than 30 minutes. There is another backup guard show to be done in the future. TJ McConnell, Ricky Rubio, Brad Wanamaker will be that one, but I'm not sure what player season reviews we'll do next. Next week on Locked On Pacers, going to do more prospect breakdowns, going to try to do the higher guys pre-lotto when it's still in theory plausible that the Pacers could pick them. And if the Pacers jump up, great. I already have the content up there. So next week, some combo of maybe, AJ Griffin, Shaden Sharp, Paolo Banchero, Jaden Ivey. Some of those guys will be our prospect previews. We'll do another free agency preview of Lance Stephenson, and then more of these player season recap groups. I'll probably do one of the vet wing groups that has like TJ Warren in it next week, or the Chris Duarte's group, just a more exciting group than the three we had today that, all could not be on the team next season. So look forward to that. We're going to have a lot coming up here on Locked On Pacers as the offseason swings into a little more of an exciting mode, because it's May the next time you'll be hearing my voice. And in May, it's draft lottery month. You'll get a lot of clarity about the Pacers offseason that day. And we'll, of course, cover it all here on Locked On Pacers. So thank you guys for listening. Hope you have a great weekend, and we will see you on Monday.